Hi everyone, thanks for coming to Ian and the family's press conference today. We're going to start with Ian reading a statement giving the family's reaction to the inquest. He'll be followed by Mary Varney from Leader Solicitors, who will also give a short statement, and then we're going to go into questions for all the NGOs. The family have specifically asked for these NGOs to attend today to give the wider kind of views on what's going on in the world of online safety and child protection. So we'd really appreciate if you could direct your questions at each of them and specifically name who you would like your question to be aimed at and not just use it as an opportunity to interview Ian by group. We'll see if you could shout up your questions. If it's not loud enough, we've got this mic to hand around. If you could just say who you are, where your question's directed, and then we'll go from there. And I'll try and be as fair as possible and give everyone a chance to have a say. Is the levels and views and everything okay for everyone? Everyone will try and, the ones on the edge will try and stand up, but Ian and Mary are going to sit down and read their statements now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Molly was a thoughtful, sweet-natured, caring, inquisitive, selfless, beautiful individual. Although a few words cannot possibly encapsulate our wonderful girl. Molly wanted all those she loved to live long and stay strong. We'd like to widen that invitation to include anyone who may be needing help. To anyone who has been affected by the issues raised in Molly's inquest, to anyone struggling, please remember that help is available. Please find a way to seek it out. Please take care when online. This past fortnight has been particularly painful for our family. We're missing Molly more agonisingly than usual, but we hope that the scrutiny this case has received will help prevent similar deaths, encouraged by the disturbing content that is still online to this day. It's available on social media platforms, including those run by Meta. Through the inquest, we have seen just a fraction of the Instagram posts seen by my 14-year-old daughter Molly in 2017. Posts that were too disturbing for some to see in court. Posts that are not allowed to be broadcast. Posts that caused an expert psychiatrist weeks of poor sleep. And posts the senior coroner has now concluded contributed to Molly's death. We've heard a senior Meta executive describe this deadly stream of content the platform's algorithms pushed to Molly as safe and not contravening the platform's policies. If this demented trail of life-sucking content was safe, my daughter Molly would probably still be alive. Instead of being a bereaved family of 4, there'd be 5 of us looking forward to a life full of promise and purpose that lay ahead for our adorable Molly. It's time the toxic corporate culture at the heart of the world's biggest social media platform changed. It's time for the government's online safety bill to urgently deliver its long-promised legislation. It's time to protect our innocent young people instead of allowing platforms to prioritise their profits by monetising the misery of young people. For the first time today, tech platforms have been formally held responsible for the death of a child. In the future, we as a family hope that any other social media companies called upon to assist an inquest follow the example of Pinterest, who have taken steps to learn lessons and have engaged sincerely and respectfully with the inquest process. This landmark conclusion has only been possible thanks to the extraordinary work of a team of people. Firstly, I'd like to thank Senior Coroner Andrew Walker for his determination to learn what we can from Molly's tragedy. The Russell family's legal team have spent too many long hours examining thousands of pages of disturbing evidence without Mary Varney, our solicitor from Lee Day, and paralegal Caleb Borden, Jessica Elliott, our barrister, and Oliver Sanders, our KC from One Crown Office Row, and a host of others working hard to build this case, who would not know how harmful our unregulated online world is. And I hope the data gathered may prove useful beyond this courtroom in Barnet and continue to help create a safer web. The support we have received from family and friends and supporters has been vital to this. And thank you too to the press who have so sensitively covered this story so that the lessons we've learned have been reported responsibly, and hopefully those lessons will travel far. For Molly's sake, let's make the online world a place that prioritises the safety and well-being of young people over the money that can be made from them. And for anyone struggling, I'll say again, please reach out to real people who can help you. Please don't forget, there's always hope. Thank you.
The last 2 weeks, and indeed the very long road since the death of much-loved Molly, underline the importance of inquests and the strength of a coroner's investigation when done properly. Molly's family have faced considerable hurdles and are grateful to Senior Coroner Andrew Walker for his persistence in helping them obtain as much information as possible about Molly's online experiences. The battles bereaved families face when seeking answers from social media companies are immense. And even with the Senior Coroner taking a robust approach, it was only in August this year that Meta provided over 1,200 Instagram posts that Molly had engaged with. That was less than a month before this inquest started. This included some of the most distressing videos and posts on Instagram that Molly had engaged with. Seeking to find out how your loved one died should never be a battle, and Molly's family have welcomed the transparency shown by Pinterest, as well as their acceptance and apology for the deeply harmful material that Molly was able to access. The coroner's finding that Molly's death was contributed to by the negative effects of online content, having heard evidence about what Molly viewed and engaged with on Instagram and Pinterest, reflect the views of Molly's family, those who knew her best and loved her the most. We all owe this family an incredible debt of gratitude, and together with them, I hope the conclusion that children's lives remain at risk is acted upon urgently, so that tech giants can no longer invite our children onto wholly unsafe and harmful platforms. Thank you.
We'll now take some questions. Leslie the Green.
Thank you very much. Frances Reid, BBC News. Mr. Russell, in your opinion, have social media companies created a monster they can no longer control?
I think social media companies set out to create useful tools, useful platforms for us all to use for benefit. They didn't really consider anything to do with safety. They didn't include that in their thought process when they designed their products. And sadly, their products are misused by people, and their products aren't safe, and they don't have enough measures within those products to make them safe. And that's the monster, if you like, that has been created. But it's a monster that we must do something about in order to make it safe for our children in the future.
And if you had one message for Mark Zuckerberg or similar CEOs of similar social media companies, what would that be?
I think a simple message to Mark would be just to listen to people that use his platform, listen to the conclusions that the coroner gave in this inquest, and then do something about it.
Sam Holder from ITV News London. Mr. Russell, you've campaigned tirelessly for better online safety since Molly's death. Is today a moment where you feel that you can take a back seat and that your work is done?
I suspect the work of campaigning for online safety is an ongoing process. As fast as you find ways to make the online world safer, the tech companies and the tech industry develops new ways of operating that also need to be considered to be safe. Beeban, I don't know if you want to comment on this, because you're more expert than I am.
Just to say that what the Russell family have done and their legal team have done is not only in Molly's memory, but in other families who've lost children and other families who are struggling at the moment with services that do not treat their children adequately. And I think watching from the back of the courtroom, what we saw today is it isn't safe enough, and it can be safer, because what was at stake here was the actual design and process of those systems and the way that they recommended and nudged and pushed into what Ian said the other day as a ghetto of horrible material, so bad that none of you can report it, yeah, is something that no business should be able to do. So what we're seeking here is actually product safety, safety by design, something very simple and something very normal in every other sector.
Hi, Dan Milway here from the Guardian newspaper. A question for Ian and for the panel. You refer to the online safety bill. It's going to return to Parliament, do you understand? Do you think that presents an opportunity to toughen the criminal sanctions that are contained within the bill?
I think the online safety bill presents a whole range of opportunities, important opportunities that will make the online world safer, not just in tragic cases like this one, but in so many other areas as well. And it's really long overdue. But again, I know someone who's been right at the middle of the way that bill's been developed. Beeban sat on the Joint Scrutiny Committee, so I'm sure you have something to say.
I would just ask everyone to consider the incredible act of transparency. We've seen material in open court that we've never seen before. And I think one of the jobs of the online safety bill is to make that transparency, a radical transparency, an industry norm. I think that by looking at risk assessments, actually naming the homes, and actually having proper age assurance that is fit for purpose, not exaggerated, and not a way for companies to pull children in and profile them even further, are all things that we're looking at. But absolutely, the online safety bill, we have it here now. It's been too long in coming. We've waited 5 years, just as the Russells have waited 5 years for this inquest, and it is a huge opportunity, and now we need the government to bring it forward and take that opportunity.
Peter.
And as each month goes by, another 3,500 crimes are committed against children online, and those are the ones that are being surfaced and the police know about, which is kind of scratching at the surface. So there is a real imperative, both in terms of the safety of our children online, but also in terms of parliamentary timetabling to get on with this, because we are close enough with appropriate focus to have something that will apply legal obligations and responsibilities onto these companies. And it's that shift in culture and leadership and appropriate prioritisation of child safety against the misplaced prioritisation of other business imperatives that's vital in terms of this piece of legislation.
Just to add to that, the list of crimes, as Peter has said, is huge, but as we speak, there are children considering suicide, and the data that we do have in this country shows that there are around 200 suicides in children every year. That's a huge number. When I was waiting this morning to go into court, I was listening to some of the conversations that we were all having. Many of you are parents, many of you have brothers and sisters, many of you are deeply connected to this because it could be your family. And that's, I want to pay tribute to all of the Russell family for this massive contribution to online safety and to suicide safety too. Let's get it out there that this is the leading cause of death in young people. Let me say that again. Your child is more likely to die by suicide than any other cause. That does not make it inevitable. These are largely preventable deaths. And what you've done, may I say today, as I said, if I may say like this, we've been using the word tech giants, social media giants. The only giants in that room today, if I may say, as well as the coroner, was this guy and his family. They're the giants, and we stand on their shoulders as we look forward. Thank you, Jade.
I think also, Ian, you were talking about scale. I mean, on average, we talk to about 2,000 people every day. 50% of those are school-age children. 30% of them talk to us about suicide, and 30% talk to us about self-harm. It's not, these are not anomalies or isolated cases or, you know, somewhere in the corner. This is something which children and young people are experiencing every day. There is no question, certainly from our service, we see peaks in demand on our service when there is harmful content posted online. It's not that the two things are linked. Now, it's, as Ian has said quite rightly, it is really important that the message is out that there is help. And that might be us, or it could be Papyrus or Childline or any of the other hundreds of charities that are there to provide support for children. But we will be fighting a losing battle against harmful online content unless the conditions that allow it to flourish are changed.
Julian Drucker from Channel 5. Thanks for all the panel for doing this today. Ian, what was it like to be in the same room as those social media executives and to hear what they had to say?
It was very interesting to be in the same room as the social media executives, and my reaction to what they had to say depended on the way they said it and the way that they acquitted themselves. So you can imagine it was different when Pinterest's witness was giving evidence and when Meta's witness was giving evidence. But I think it just summed up the corporate culture that maybe prevails in the tech industry in some cases and on some of the platforms. And it's that needs to change. It's the corporate culture that needs to change so that they do put safety first rather than profit.
Josh?
Hi everyone, Josh Payne from the Press Association. I've got a question for the panel, I've got a question for Ian. The question for the panel is, obviously we heard today that suicide was not the cause of death given. It was a combination of things. It was self-harm, depression, and most importantly, the disturbing stuff that Molly was viewing online. Are you concerned that there are other cases that have gone by that have been suicide that perhaps, given the disclosure we've had in this case and we didn't have in those cases, that actually their cause of death was given wrong? I also have another question for you, which is, given the conclusions that have been given today, are you considering taking legal action against social media companies?
Jed, did you want to answer that?
So historically, suicide was a crime. It was very difficult to conclude, or in those days it was a verdict, and we've recently moved into less criminalising language, so we now use the term conclusion. But the coroner rightly said that there's some quite taxing tests that the coroner must undertake before they make that conclusion. But it was clear to everybody in that court what had happened, and indeed the family didn't sort of hide from the possibility that suicide was part of this story. So I think we need to recognise what we've become in recent history. It was only in 2018, through pressure from organisations like Papyrus and others, to say how can we really enable young people to reach out for help when we still have decades, vestiges of that criminalising language, like committing suicide. You don't commit cancer. You don't commit depression. We shouldn't use that language because it reinforces. And we discovered that actually the one thing that the coroner, the chief coroner could do was to persuade government to change the way in which we administer death, to conclude on the balance of probability, a term that was used several times in the courtroom over the last few days. So that shift is significant. And why is that important? Because it's more likely in the long game that we move away from that criminalised language, and now we're more likely to be able to say as readily as I'm feeling poorly, I'm thinking about suicide. So the long game is to decriminalise, finally, even though we changed the law in 1961 in this country, we're still using unhelpful language. And I think that enables people who may be considering suicide to talk more openly about it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it was historic. I mean, nothing short of historic, the way that the conclusion was couched. And we do know, and I'm afraid my inbox in Parliament is full of people who've lost children, sadly, yeah? And many of them struggle to get the information that they want, to get the access, to get that transparency. And I will be bringing forward an amendment to the Online Safety Bill in the House of Lords that seeks to make it easier for bereaved parents to access information from social media companies.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the same from the number of families which the NSPCC has worked with who find themselves in similarly tragic situations. It's absolutely certain that there are young people who've taken their lives as a consequence of the sort of pressures that we have heard about through this inquest. And this is a watershed moment, and it is as a consequence of the extraordinary determination and resilience that the Russell family and those supporting them have had to keep asking the questions, keep battering away to try and get the information in order to enable a conclusion like this to be realised. That is the reason that we are here. I mean, this is 5 long years of incredibly hard work, and frankly it leaves a pretty bad taste in the mouth when you understand the pressure and the reluctance with which Meta in particular have eventually served up this information. So Baroness Kidron's amendment is really important for the future, but it doesn't kind of forgive the misplaced priorities of the past.
Okay. Just very briefly, I mentioned that this was a coroner's investigation done properly. Unfortunately, not all coroner's investigations are done properly, and not all bereaved families have the chance to seek answers. So when you say, is this going to happen again, and will this change things? I hope so. I hope other coroners, other lawyers, other families now understand what can be achieved and should be achieved when you're looking at how somebody came by their death.
I mean, it is absolutely inevitable that this has happened to other families, and I think what's really important, certainly in our experience, is that when someone is considering taking their life, it's very rarely one thing. It's a multitude of things, and particularly for children and young people, helping them to understand how they can make sense of some of those thoughts and feelings is really important. And so it's really important that we talk about those thoughts and feelings in a sensitive and caring way, so that young people know where they can go and get the right help and support in order to be able to deal with those. Because it is the sense often that you're dealing with this alone, which can be incredibly damaging. And we know that, that reaching out for help and support can feel very difficult, but there are many, many different ways of being able to do that. And just sharing that sense of fear, but also sharing that you are considering ending your life is very helpful for people, because it enables them to have the conversation they want to have and don't know how to have. And that's what's really important, I think, to take out of it from the perspective of well, anyone really, but particularly children and young people.
Yes, in terms of what's been occupying our minds for the last 5 years, it's the inquest. It's been at the forefront of our minds, and any other action, legal action or whatever action we might take has been very much at the back of our minds.
Hello, Miranda Sugar from Talk TV. You've called for much needed change now from government and tech companies, but while that takes effect, while the process goes on, I wondered what you wanted to say to parents out there who are perhaps dealing with some of the issues that you've dealt with Molly, and really, how do they engage more with their children and find out what they're doing online?
I think that's the secret to being safe online, is to make sure there's communication between the generations, to make sure parents and children have open conversations. When you grow up, when you're a teenager, there's a natural moving away from your parents. There's a natural establishing yourself as an individual that happens. And it's never been easy to be a teenager. Some people find it harder than others, but it's never been easier. But throughout that process, it's really important to have a pathway for communication. And I think one of the things that happened to Molly was a pathway for communicating her worries and her problems was blocked in some way, because an alternative pathway was provided by sources on social media. These sources, I think, were harmful and weren't going to help Molly. But I'm sure Molly, one of the reasons Molly may have come across them was that she turned to social media like so many youngsters would do, to try and find help, to not burden her parents. She was always very independent and very good at solving her own problems. Sadly, I think that connected her to a digital world of danger that led her away from her parents and drove a wedge between us that stopped that communication. So it's easier to say than do, but just try and find ways to communicate between the generations, between parents and children. Encourage your children to come to you with what they find online as well.
I would add to that, Ian. It's very brave to have a conversation with a child about difficult things, and I often say to teachers, what's the most difficult thing to teach in school? And they say sex. And then they say, what do I do? And I say, I teach them about suicide, and they say, we'll stick with the sex. My point is this: let's not leave this to teachers. We can each be brave and have very challenging, difficult conversations which will save life. If you're worried about someone and you see their behaviour is different, sometimes when people behave like this, they're considering suicide. Is that part of your story? Now you're going to think I'm crazy suggesting that. All the evidence is behind it. That will create safety. So safety is not just online, it's right in front of us right now. If somebody in this room is struggling right now, and you see them struggling, naturally you want to care. Go the extra step, say, is suicide part of your story? You can't make it worse, you can only make it safer.
I think the other thing that is, we see this on our platform all the time, that the vast majority of people who contact us for help and support don't feel deserving of help and support. And that is one of those blockers Ian was talking about, where you feel like you have brought this upon yourself, you're not worthy, you're a burden, everybody would be better off without you. And that's a very real feeling. And so being aware, even when you're talking to your children or to your friends or colleagues about anything really, just reinforcing that how people feel and how they might be feeling emotionally at the moment is
is important. It's not, you're not being a burden, you're not being difficult, you're not taking up my time. That sort of thing is really important, because it is that, all of these things that push you back into yourself and make it more difficult for you to talk about how you're feeling are dangerous. And they're particularly dangerous if you then add into them some of the real misinformation that's available online, and particularly, you know, glamorising some of the actions that people take when they are feeling that way, such as self-harm or suicidal thoughts. So it's very important to make people feel good about talking, that it's the right thing to do, and reaching out for help is a good thing to do, and people will be pleased that you have.
Everybody at this table is more specialist than I am about talking to people in crisis, but I have been running for at least a decade now workshops with young people, and one thing that I have found is that if they understand how the system works, how it nudges and pushes, how it discriminates against certain things, that they have a very strong sense of fairness, and they become much more critical. So I would say that there is a huge role for parents upstream as well in making their children critical consumers of these products right from the very start, which in no way absolves the tech companies from their responsibility of creating a safe platform, to be clear.
I think this is all great advice, obviously, and creating those kind of early conversations in families really matters. But it's also important for young people to understand, you know, sometimes some of these issues, your parents are the last person that you want to engage with first off. So Childline is an example of a service that is here by children, for children, confidential, and a place where young people can go and explore some of those issues or worries or concerns with in a safe space, including in kind of moderated communities with other young people, to get to that place where they have a bit more confidence to then engage with the trusted adults around them. So I guess what we're wanting to say is that this is really difficult. There are lots of young people who find themselves in challenging situations. There are also options and choices which will be different to different young people, but please don't worry away in silence and think that there's no one there to listen to you, because there are.
And also, I'm reminded of a story that I heard from the primary school that my daughter went to, Molly went to, and they have a system. So right at the beginning of primary school, you're never too young. They have a system where each child has an icon, a badge that's theirs, and when they come in at the start of the day, they put that badge on a wall chart, and they can have a happy face if they're feeling happy, or a sad face if they're feeling sad, or a face that depicts they might be feeling unwell or grumpy or cross, and they come and put their icon there. When they're young, they come in and they don't mind where they put that icon. They don't mind telling people they're cross or grumpy or unwell or happy or sad. And sometimes a child will go up to the poster and move their icon at some point in the day, and they might stop being happy and start being sad. They don't mind being honest about that. And what's interesting, the school said, when a child does that, so often other children will go up and say, you were happy and you're not, what's wrong? It's quite natural for people to want to help each other. And somehow when we grow up, we lose that ability. So in a way, I think that natural ability we all have when we're young should be encouraged, and we should try and find ways to keep it, so that when we become adults, we're better at doing that as well.
Ian, many of the tech company bosses are parents. Parent to parent, for you now, what would be your message to them?
I think the tech company bosses need to think very hard about what their children can do on their platforms. I've heard stories that some tech company platforms don't even allow their children on their own platforms. I don't know how true they are, but that may be the case. But whether it's their children or anyone else's child, if you allow a young person on your platform, that platform has to be safe for children to use.
Thank you very much, Channel 4 News. This is for Ian and Mary. You talked about corporate culture on display in the courtroom, and I wonder, do you have any faith that Pinterest or Meta will make their platforms safe for children as a result of this inquest?
I've always said that in terms of tech change and tech improvement in terms of safety, we shouldn't be listening to the words that are spoken by the tech platforms. We should be watching the actions that they take. And all the platforms have taken some steps to make their platforms safer. I think those steps are tiny, and I think that globally dominant platforms with huge budgets can move much faster. The tech industry is a very fast-moving, well-funded sector. I think they should be moving faster. So I think we should all be looking at them and judging them by their actions.
I, for one, having heard both platforms' apology, Pinterest more fuller, I think, than Meta. You know, when you say sorry, you need to then show that you're not going to repeat your behaviour, as Ian says. So I think now we'll just have to see, and I very much hope that Meta in particular, when they made the offer at the end of the very end of the hearing, that they would meet with Molly Rose Foundation and others, that they do that and that they listen very carefully and have some humility.
I think the other thing that comes out of that is a more open, transparent and honest dialogue. They've controlled things by limiting access to their data, limiting access to researchers and people who are interested in this area. It's really important that there's much more transparency and that control isn't in the hands of the tech platforms, and that people, right, the people here, Five Rights, NSPCC, Papyrus, Shout, and many other NGOs around the world, we should all have access to the data. We should all join the conversations with the tech platforms, because collectively then we can make a difference.
I think it's also really important to this conversation about this situation is about platforms, that it's about two specific platforms. There are others. And when, you know, those platforms need to be looking at themselves, particularly the platforms that are targeting much younger children. So we have seen the number of children under 13 who use our platform double in the last 8 months, and that's driven entirely by another platform. Platforms have to be safe before they come online, not after they come online, not as a sort of afterthought, not when they've made enough money to invest in safety. It must be a prerequisite, not a choice.
Can I just say, it's time for the law to change. It's time to put it in law. This is not about conversations with tech companies and how willing they are and how far they will go. That is over. We've had a decade where they willfully ignored all the evidence. They hid the evidence, and they didn't even give the evidence when a child died. It's over. It's time to change the law.
Hello, Mario Legeth here from the Times. This follows on from the last question. You touched upon the need for change. Can I just ask Ian and the rest of the panel what specific measures you'd like to see tech companies like Meta putting in place now and not in a year or 2 years' time? What's the dream scenario?
I think they need to move at speed in order to take harmful content down. But content removal is too late. It needs to happen if harmful content is online. Perhaps an even greater priority is the tech platforms need to look at the way their algorithms work. It's one thing to have harmful content on your platform, but it's quite another when that content is promoted and algorithmically pushed towards someone, maybe a young person, maybe a vulnerable person. And that algorithmic amplification is one of the biggest causes of harm, I think, in this case. I think that's something that Molly was particularly affected by, the suggestion of more depressive suicide-related self-harm content to Molly made it almost inescapable. And the removal of those pushy algorithms, taking content that is harmful and delivering it onto the screens of children that may be in their homes or in their playgrounds, wherever they are, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is the first thing that needs to be looked at.
I'm just mindful of, in 2008, I think there was a series of young suicides in South Wales. And you guys were part of that story, the media, and realised very quickly that the more we sensationalise these deaths, the more they happen. Papyrus and others asked for a media outage, and the deaths stopped. We need to do something radically with social media. Print media and broadcast media, largely, are getting it right. Largely, we don't have as many complaints to make about you anymore, which is good. We can't say the same about social media.
In the offline world, the fundamentals of child protection are designed in. You know, we take it for granted that when a toy is made, it doesn't have sharp corners, it doesn't have lead paint, it doesn't have chokeable parts for children under a certain age. These are really basic things which we have come to live with and expect over time. They're not caught up in a battle of argument about child protection versus freedom of speech. You know, there are some absolute basics to keep children safe, which nobody disagrees with, including the tech companies when they sit down with Beeban and me and others over and over again over many years and offer us warm words and good intentions. But to actively exercise a duty of care and to design the fundamentals of child protection into their services, so they know we're on their platforms and they're having regard to what the basic protections are to keep the children safe is what we need. And there's plenty of evidence and insight which we and others can contribute to enable that to happen. But as Beeban said, it's got to be underpinned now by law, and it's a fortuitous opportunity, I guess. I mean, it's a great shame that we've been arguing for this legislation for well over 5 years, but we now have a really important and powerful illustration at a moment in time to get the online safety bill through and passed and have these fundamentals of child protection established in law.
I think if you think about the equivalent in the offline world of having a cinema on a high street inviting children in where they might see films that glamorised self-harm, that normalised depression, hopelessness, self-hate, what do you think would happen? It would get shut down immediately and our children would be safer.
I think the other thing, just to add to that, I think in both those analogies, is that the algorithms are designed to be addictive. That's how they're designed. They're designed to make you keep scrolling, keep looking. And we protect our children from other addictive things as a matter of course. And this is, I don't think this is any different. We have to protect children from something which is designed to create a change in the way that they think and behave.
Yeah, I mean, I think my wish list is so long I won't take you through it, but anyone who wants to be here afterwards, I've got it in my head written. But I do think that we've got to shift from a point of thinking of child protection as aspirational and start to think of it as a price of doing business. Yeah, it goes before you make profit, it goes before growth, it goes before anything else. And I think, you know, as you said, if you cannot make money without eye-watering, you know, levels of self-harm and prodding children and waking them up in the middle of the night, etc., then you're not really fit to trade. So let's get a bit harsh about what the outcome is. The actual doing it is rather practical. Risk assessment, mitigation, transparency and so on. And that is why the online safety bill is an imperative. And we're all going to just say it again and again. We have to have a bill that ends up stopping not only outcomes like the one that we're discussing today at Molly, but actually all the outcomes for kids who are in these loops of depression or social comparison, self-worth, you know, scamming, etc., etc. That's the outcome we've got to work for, and the list is long.
Okay, I'll just take one last question, and then each of the panel members are going to give a final thought. Lady on the top.
Hello, Katie from Sky News. To Ian and the panel. Liz Truss has said that tweaks will be made to the bill over censorship concerns. Are you at all concerned that it's going to be watered down? What would you like to say to the Prime Minister? It's been quite a while coming, this bill.
I'd like to say that the bill has been quite a while coming, but that's given ample opportunity for it to be drafted very sensibly. There was public consultation, there was a scrutiny committee, and it's coming up to its third reading in the Commons. It will go on to receive further scrutiny in the Lords before it's passed on to the statute books. So I think there's been ample opportunity to get it right, and if there are little things that need tweaking, there's still the opportunity in the normal process of a bill going through Parliament to make those improvements. What's needed is to get it right now, otherwise other lives might be compromised.
And the government has continued to say that child protection is at the heart of this bill, and its aspiration is for the UK to be the safest place for children to be online. So we are all generously offering as much as we possibly can to help the government fulfil that objective. And we know that there are millions of people in the country who share that objective for the legislation, so we just need to get that in place quickly.
And I think that everyone in this room, on that side of the room, has a role to play, because you can't just show up when a child dies. Yeah? If you want a good bill, you have to go through all the nitty-gritty, boring stuff that makes a good bill.
Okay, we'll have final thoughts from everyone, ending in Ian, who I think should get the last word on this. So do you want to go first, Peter?
Okay, thank you. Well, today is all about Molly and Molly's family, and again, just to kind of reinforce the tributes that we're all making to Ian and the family for the resilience that you have shown to arrive at what now must be a watershed moment for children online, and to reinforce the point that Beeban has just made. I'm afraid for too long we have proceeded in this space, tragedy by tragedy by tragedy, with public outrage at moments in time and calls for things to be better, and then we slip away and everyone talks about other things, and it doesn't fundamentally get better. We have a legislative opportunity in the coming weeks to achieve that step change, so let's make sure we do, because I don't want to be here talking about another isolated watershed moment in another 12 months' time. The legacy from what's been going on here can be so much more powerful than that. Thanks.
I think I want to thank the coroner for his conclusion, because sitting there in the back of the court, you know, understanding what pressure he was under, you know, to narrow his vision, to see the world in a way that was not complex. And I just really want to thank him for coming to the conclusion and for going forward and putting in front of all of us, government, media, NGOs and so on, and tech companies, of course, you know, where he thinks we have to look and what we have to look at. And I think it's historic what he did today, and I thank him for it.
I think the light has been shone by Molly's family on an incredibly dark place on these popular global platforms. And now change is not an option, it must be imperative. And I hope that platforms, government, parents, all of us, just remember what the Molly's family have done for us all.
I extend those thanks not just to the Russell family, who my heart goes out to you, and not just up to today, it continues to, and you will have all of our support in the days ahead when the cameras are away and the inquest is over. In a way, for all of us, the work begins. Papyrus was founded 25 years ago by parents like this one, who said it's not inevitable that children take their own lives. It's preventable. In spite of our pain, we want to help your children. So you're watching this today, thank you. And if you're listening to this, change your interest into action. Not just Meta and YouTube and Pinterest, not waiting for them to change. Let's change. Let's be more kind to each other. It's a message for them as well, by the way. But have a conversation because of this with somebody you love. It may save their life.
Again, I would just like to say how extraordinarily brave Ian and his family have been. I don't know where you will have got the strength from. And I suppose the only other thing to say is that in thinking about what's happened here, it's really important to remember that it's happening a lot, all the time. Not necessarily with this kind of conclusion, but children are having these thoughts and worries and concerns all the time. And so it's important that we talk about it. It's important that we let them know that there is help for them. And it is important, more important than ever, that we pass this bill.
I just have to say we shouldn't be sitting here. As I've said, this is a story about one person, but that person has affected one family and their friends and maybe the wider world in some way. We should not be sitting here. This should not happen because it does not need to happen. But we told this story in the hope that change would come about. We couldn't tell this story without the help of all sorts of people sitting here, friends, family, the press who've reported it so well and widely. And I hope that the world will be safer, the digital world particularly will be a safer place to inhabit. And the final thing I want to say is thank you, Molly, for being my daughter.